All right, sorry about that. We are in the Beatitudes today, and we're continuing our service with the Beatitudes, or our series with the Beatitudes. And you can find the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12, part of the Sermon on the Mount. Some people consider the Sermon on the Mount the most important sermon that Jesus preached. It was definitely one of the biggest sermons that Matthew recorded, and the first sermon that he recorded. Before we go much further, I was thinking about this week, and I was thinking about back when I was in university, and I was in a university in the state of New Mexico in the United States, and New Mexico's right next to Arizona, if you know where Arizona is, kind of in between Arizona and Texas. So anyway, I was down there in the university. While I was in the university, I served as an intern in a church. I was working as a student in the student ministry of the church, working at that time primarily with the junior high kids. I did things with the high school kids, did things with the university ministry as well too. But at this time, I was primarily working with the junior high kids. I also had other responsibilities in the church. Part of the internship program was that we had to be at staff meetings on Mondays. So every Monday, the staff would join. There were 4 full-time pastors. I think there was 3 interns, maybe 4 interns. It just depended on what year it was. The other support staff. And so there was always about 10 to 15 people at these staff meetings. And part of the staff meeting was that we had to evaluate the previous day's service. That's why it was done on Monday, so we could do it before we forgot about what happened on Sunday before. So the church actually had services on Saturday night and then Sunday, and there was other ministries going on as well. So it was just an evaluation of basically the weekend and everything that happened over the weekend. You could talk about things that happened. You're encouraged to point out the good things that happened. You're also encouraged that if something needed to be fixed or corrected or it was wrong, you needed to bring that out too. So among my roommates, he was actually it was my only roommate. He was an intern at the church too, and he also worked with the college students. That was his main responsibility at that point. And he and I were in the college, what we called the college service. As I mentioned, the church had multiple services. Sunday morning, there was 3 services. The middle service was the service targeted for college students. So we were out the college student service. The pastor's preaching his message, and the pastor then used a phrase. And we were both kind of shocked about the phrase. And it wasn't only us shocked. It was college students. You can hear the college students, some of them kind of giggling, some of them kind of looking like surprised that the pastor said what he said. And my roommate and I both had the same concern, and we didn't know what to do. And later that day we talked about it. We're like, well, how should we handle this? What should we do? And we decided, well, we're supposed to bring up good things and bad things in the staff meeting, so tomorrow at staff meeting, let's bring it up. Let's mention it. So we went in the staff meeting. We were doing an evaluation time, and we brought it up. We said, hey, in your sermon yesterday, you said this. And the pastor's like, yeah. Well, you don't want to say that anymore. And he didn't understand why. And we had to tell him, and when we told him, he was a little bit shocked. Because he had no idea. Because he had used an expression that for up to that time, maybe for 100 to 150 years, with this expression that was used in the U.S., it was kind of an idiom that was used, and it meant one thing. And actually, the way he used it in his sermon was the way he meant to use it. And it was a good expression that way. But in the subculture of that time, in the culture of language at that time, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, whenever this happened, I don't remember exact dates when it happened, but in that culture at that time, the meaning of that phrase had become to mean something completely different. It actually meant something that was very vulgar. It was something you never expected to hear your pastor say in church. But he had said it. And so we dealt with it at that time. And he was surprised. He said, well, I'll make a note of that. I won't use that phrase anymore for a long time. And it was done. Well, today, when we talk about the Sermon on the Mount, when we talk about the verse that we're going to look at today, there's a word in this verse that, again, when it was originally translated from the Greek into English, meant something completely different than what it usually means to us today. We're going to look at that today, and we're going to look at how language changes and some things happen. A woman named Judith Herman wrote this. She said that she actually wrote a little article. It said there are 11 words with meanings that have changed dramatically over time. And she makes the point out that language is ever changing. And she says this. She says actually, I didn't write down what she said because I printed it out over here because I wanted to read you some of the things that she said. So here's what she said. She said, what a word means depends not on its origin, but how speakers of a language understand it. Over time, words have a way of wandering, and meanings mutate. And she gives 11 examples, because that's the title of her article, 11 Words with Meanings That Change Dramatically Over Time. I'm not going to read you 11 of them, but I picked out 5 of them that I thought were kind of fun. Okay? First thing she talks about is awful and awesome. Originally, awful and awesome meant the same things. They were synonyms together. But she writes, she said, early in the 19th century, awful absorbed the negative aspects of the emotion, and it usually now means, something that's frightful or exceedingly bad. And then awesome, she said awesome still maintained a little bit of its meaning, but in 1980, this is the first time that in a dictionary it really changed. It means marvelous, great, stunning, or mind-boggling. Okay? Completely different in the original meanings. They were synonymous together. They meant the same thing. But now, we never say something is awful or awesome. We may say it's awfully awesome. Now, I'm not even going to try to explain that one, okay? But you guys have figured it out. How about this? Girl. I didn't know this, but she says girl once meant a child of young person of either sex. I was like, really? So I could walk into a room of children and say, hi, girls, and I would be correct. Okay, but they wouldn't be happy, especially half of that room full of children, or near half of that room full of children. How about meat? Anybody want to eat any meat for lunch today? Well, meat originally meant solid food or fodder for animals. Hey, you want to go slop the pigs? You want to go give the pigs the leftovers? That was meat. So, if you look at meat that way, no, I don't want any meat, okay? Meanings change. How about naughty? Okay? I was a little bit surprised over this one too. Naughty people had nothing. They were poor or needy. That was in the 1300s. By the 1400s, the meaning shifted from having nothing to being worth nothing, being morally bad or wicked. Then in the 1600s, naughty also included a gentler meaning, especially when applied to children, as being mischievous, disobedient, or badly behaved, which is pretty much how we understand it today. Then she gives the last example, and this example has many different meanings through times, and that's the word nice. She said this, she said, a few centuries ago, if a gentleman called a lady nice, she may not know whether to flutter her fan or to slap his face, because nice could mean so many different things, okay? To begin with, nice comes from the Latin word meaning ignorant. So you used to call somebody nice, you were just calling them, fool or ignorant or dumb, that type of thing, okay? From the 1300s to the 1600s, it meant different things. It meant silly, it meant foolish. It didn't mean ignorant as well. It was also used with these meanings: to be showy or ostentatious, to be elegant or refined. Those are almost two completely opposite things. To be particular in matters of reputation or conduct, to be cowardly, to be unmanly, to be effeminate, to be slothful, to be lazy, to be sluggish, to be not obvious, to be difficult to decide, intricate. That's just in a couple of hundred years. The meanings changed so much. Then she said by the 1500s, nice became to mean meticulous, attentive, sharp, making precise distinctions. Then by the 18th century, so the 1700s, it acquired its current and rather bland meaning of agreeable and pleasant. But other meanings hung on just to keep things interesting. Words change with time. And we're going to discuss a word today that changes with time. Language is ever changing. And I think it's important to know that this word has changed and its meaning has changed so much. And hopefully after today, whenever you read this in the Bible, you'll have a different understanding of the word itself. So let's go on. So on your screen, again, you see the Greek merikos, which means happy and blessed. I just want to remind you of this, that all these Beatitudes start with this Greek word, and it's often translated as blessed, but we can think about it as being happy, okay? Bill Muntz says this. Bill Muntz is a Greek scholar. He's wrote some books, some things about learning Greek, especially for biblical scholars. But he also wrote another book where I really like, it's Greek for the rest of us, where he was just saying, let's give you some basics so that you can kind of look at Greek and understand Greek. He says there are two major ways that merikos may be taken in the New Testament. First, as a person is happy or fortunate because of life circumstances. And second, it conveys the idea of being especially favored, blessed, happy, or privileged. So we look at these, and we looked at each of these different Beatitudes, and it's looking at it, hey, you are favored by God. You can be happy if you apply these things into your life. You'll be blessed by God if you apply these things into our life. So he says this. He said, the one who's merikos can be happy or privileged because of life circumstances and because of life-defined favors bestowed on him or her. That's what I want in my life. That's what I want in your life. That's what God wants in our life. Jesus said the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. Or you can even put this word in there, have life and be blessed in that life. Have life and be joy. Have life and be happiness. It's translated many different ways in English translations. This is what God wants for us. So this is what he's pointing out to us. We can have these things and we can be a part of it. So we've gone through a couple of them already. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, in Matthew 5:3, Matthew 5:4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I mentioned to you that the poor in spirit, my understanding of that changed several years ago. I used to think about, I didn't want to be poor, financially and things like that, but I understand it now that those who are poor in spirit, they develop a deepened hope into God, and it's a spiritual humility that's there. So theirs will be the kingdom of heaven. Then the last 2 weeks we spent 2 weeks on blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and we spent 2 weeks on that simply because that one's probably the hardest one for me to understand, and I felt like we needed to spend some more time on it and just to deal with it. But let me assure you, things will go faster from here on out. Okay? Are we still? I saw everything flash. Are we still broadcasting live? So let's move on then. Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek. Okay? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek. Yeah, I keep saying the same thing over and over. Meek, 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 meek. Because honestly, reading this through many years, blessed are the meek, and it's kind of like meek. I'm going to be honest, I don't want to be meek. Okay? And I don't want to be meek because of simply this. When I think about meek, ideas pop into my mind, and ideas such as being spineless. Okay? And not standing up for myself, not standing up for things, to be submissive. Meek people are easily taken advantage of. Okay? They may be quiet. They may be easily imposed on. But meekness tends to be thought of as being a weakness. And that's because the meaning of the word has changed so much. And it's changed so much, not necessarily officially, but more like that woman said that I read earlier, how people use it and how people understand it. Because when we look at a dictionary, it doesn't give us much more hope when we talk about meekness. Look, the Merriam-Webster dictionary says this: meek, enduring injury with patience and without resentment. Okay? A deficit in spirit and in courage. Not violent, not strong. That's not what I want to be. I don't want to be those things. So we start looking at meekness. What can we look at and what can we think about? To begin with, let's look at Matthew chapter 11, 29. Because this is talking about Jesus. And Jesus is talking about himself. And Jesus is called meek. Look what he says. Take my yoke upon you. Okay? So, give your burdens to him. Take his burdens. Learn from him, for I am meek and lowly in heart. I am meek and humble, and you shall find rest in your souls. Look at the New King James Version writes this. That's in the King James. Look at the New King James. He writes that phrase this way: for I am gentle and lowly in heart. Those of you who like the King James Version, you know that the King James Version was written 450 years ago in the English that was current at the time, 450 years. That's why I don't read it very often, because when we start talking about ye shall find and thous and this, and it just confuses me. So I use a more modern translation that helps me, okay? The meanings of the words have changed so much, they even recognize it in this verse because they change it from meek to gentle. And the one thing about this, and when we talk about Jesus being gentle, and we talk about Jesus being meek, the thing about it is that in his meekness and in his gentleness, still doesn't quite grasp what the meaning of the original word is. Here's the original Greek. I hope you can read that. I can't read that. I have to read the blue words underneath. Okay? Here's the original Greek. And actually, I practiced it yesterday because I was going to try to impress you and read the Greek. But just forget it. Okay? Here's the Greek. Now, if you notice the third word there, praise, this is the word that's translated into meek. And if we look at this word, and we look at this word a little bit closely, we're going to find some things that it means. Okay? Basically, what it means is this. When we talk about meekness or gentleness that's translated from that word, it is strength under control. Okay? Let me go back to that. So, praise, strength under control. Here's a couple of things I found. Okay? Matt Norman writes this. Aristotle said that it helps if I have my glasses on. Aristotle said that the pious person was one who has a virtue of being of the mean between two extremes. If recklessness were on one end and cowardice on the other, the person characterized by meekness or gentleness would have steady courage. So they're not controlled by either one, they're combined with two. For example, a meek person doesn't shy away from taking a stand, but rather the stand is taken at the right time with the right people and in the right way. He or she submits to constraints for power, for greater effect on self and for others. So to be meek is getting angry at the right time, in the right measure, for the right reasons. Being meek is to use any emotion in the right time, the right measure, and for the right reasons. Sam Watley wrote this. He said the Greek word parias was used to define a horse trained for battle. Wild stallions were brought down from the mountains and broken for riding. Some were used to pull the wagons and some were raced, but the best were trained for warfare. They retained their fierce spirit, their courage, and their power, but they were disciplined to respond to the slightest nudge or pressure of the rider's leg. They would gallop into battle at 35 miles per hour and come to a sliding stop at a word. They were not frightened by arrows, spears, or torches. They were said to be meek. These stallions became submissive, but certainly not spineless. They embodied power under control, strength with forbearance. So from now on, whenever you read this passage, whenever you think about this word, think about this. It's strength under control. So blessed are those who have strength under control, for they will inherit the earth. Well, what does that mean? What does blessed are the meek? For they will inherit the earth. Okay? Rick Warren says this. It says, when you learn true gentleness as a man of God, when you learn true gentleness as a woman of God, it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're a doormat. It doesn't mean any of those things that you might think of meekness and gentleness means. It simply means you're not overreacting. You're in control of your emotions, and you have the strength under control. You know, I learned something one day when I was in high school. Only one day. I learned a lot more in high school. But one day when I was in high school, I learned something. I was in high school in Casper, Wyoming. I think I learned that day what it meant to be meek, what it meant to have strength under control. And it happened like this. And I don't remember their names, so I won't even attempt to use their name. But there was a couple of guys that they weren't close friends, but they were people I knew. And boy number one had been trying for a few days to get boy number two into a fight. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what the beef was. I don't know what was happening. But boy number one wanted to get boy number two in a fight. Boy number two didn't want to fight. Boy number two was meek. Okay? Boy number one was not meek. He was arrogant. He was abusive. He was prideful. I remember him saying stuff to him, trying to do all he could to get him into a fight. And he as boy number two just wouldn't respond to him, he took it as being a weakness. And it just caused him to be more prideful, to be more arrogant, and to say more and to do more. And finally, after a day or two, it just kind of reached its apex. And what happened was boy number one actually, took a swing at boy number two. And boy number two unleashed that strength under control. It happened so quick. The fight was over almost like that. It was. I can actually see it. I can see the hallway where it happened. It was right by the doorway leading outside. I was standing there. I watched it happen. Boy number one took a swing. Boy number two took about 3 swings. Boy number one was on the floor, wailing, crying, hurt. Boy number two was standing there like nothing happened. In fact, the principal came. One of the vice principals came immediately and asked boy number two, "Have you been in a fight?" And he says, "Well, do I look like I've been in a fight?" And the principal let him go. Of course, later they found out, but he let him go. That was strength under control. That was being able to withstand abuse. That was being able to take everything and to take it and to control oneself. I had a conversation with somebody in our church this week about some of these things related to the sermon today. And this person said something very important. I said, what we need to remember is that to be healthy mentally, we need a balance of emotions. And I'm going to mention this a little bit later, but I want to mention this right now. When we talk about meekness, when we talk about strength under control, there are times to be angry. There are times to be aggressive. There are times to deal with different situations in different ways. But you need to do it under control. That's what meekness is all about. The meek person is controlled and not undisciplined. The mind and the body are disciplined. They're never let loose. Passion, urges, speech, behavior, sight, and touch are always controlled. Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 says this. Again, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. One of my Bible dictionaries says this. Biblical meekness is usually not simply gentleness and humility, but those qualities displayed with integrity, especially during the time of trial. Jesus said, the meek and the gentle, those with power under control, will inherit the earth. So my question that I ask myself is how? How is that possible? And I think it's possible because Jesus understood that gentleness benefits us greatly. He understands that meekness in this way, the strength and control, that will benefit us in ways that will cause us to inherit the earth. Okay? So let's look at some of those things, how meekness can benefit us and how it can help us. The first thing is this: gentleness diffuses conflict. Look at Proverbs 15:1. It says, a gentle answer will calm a person's anger, but an unkind answer will cause more anger. Okay? You've been in relationships with people, friendships. Maybe you're married, like I am, husband and wife. And sometimes when we're fighting, sometimes when Nancy and I fight, we fight every once in a while. You can ask the neighbors; they probably tell you we fight more than every once in a while. Who knows? We do, but it's just part of life. This is natural, okay? But when we're fighting, there are things that I say, and when I say them, I immediately wished I wouldn't have said them because I know they're not going to help help us. They're just going to make the anger go up. And I will say, over 11 years of marriage, that there's probably been one or two times, maybe a couple more times that I forgot. There may have been one or two times that I may have purposely actually said something. I've learned not to do that. I've learned that doesn't help any. See, gentleness diffuses conflict. Have you ever noticed that if you see a couple of people arguing and one is yelling and one is screaming, and the other one starts yelling and screaming back, what happens? Does it solve the argument? The argument just escalates and escalates and escalates. People start yelling louder, start screaming more, start saying more mean things, start saying ugly things, and it can actually lead into a physical argument. Okay? But gentleness diffuses conflict. A gentle answer will calm a person's anger. There's a theory, and it's a theory that was something that was discovered in the 1990s, I believe it was. Story goes like this: that there are actually two different stories. I don't know which one is true. Both of them involve monkeys. Okay, they have probes in a monkey's brain, and they were testing how the neurons in the brain fires, and so they were testing the monkey. The monkey was supposed to reach out, grab food, open it up, and eat it. And they were seeing what part of the brain's fired and how they fired and different things. So supposedly what happened was they got done with the test. They were mapping all that. One scientist was sitting at a computer looking at the screen, looking at how the brain fired. And a lab assistant came in. And the lab assistant saw the food that the monkey was supposed to be eating sitting on the table. One article I read said it was walnuts. And the lab assistant picked up a walnut, opened it up, and started eating it. And the monkey's brain, even though the monkey was in the cage just sitting there watching it, the monkey's brain, the neurons in the monkey's brain started firing in the same way. And the scientist sitting at the computer noticed that and went, whoa, what's going on here? And they discovered that what they called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons, the theory is, and the idea is that is that what happens is sometimes that we can do an action and certain parts of our brains will fire, certain neurons will send messages, but also if we watch somebody else do the same action, it will fire. And so, for example, I got my cup for communion here later. If you watch somebody do this, okay, it doesn't mean much to us. But if you're somebody that holds a cup and does this, it can mean different things. Some of you may feel thirsty right now just because you saw me do that, okay? And so there's a lot of ideas there and a lot of things there. There's some scientists that believe that this is why we have empathy for each other, is because we're able to do this. It's why when you go through something painful, I'm able to feel the pain. When you go through something sad, I'm able to feel the sadness. When you go through something happy, I'm able to feel the happiness as well too. And they call them mirror neurons. And like I said, from what little reading I did this week, the science is still very young. There's still a lot of theories about it, and it's still what's going on. But it's an interesting idea, and it's an interesting thought, because I have noticed that so much, that when a person walks into a room, the people in the room may be happy, they may be content, they may be talking, but if a person comes in and they're angry, there will be at least one or two other people in that room that all of a sudden will get angry. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever been somewhere? Have you ever been like, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but have you ever been like in a restaurant and you're sitting there in a restaurant, maybe a waiter or waitress is helping somebody at the next table, and those people are angry with them, they're mad at them, they're treating them mad. You can just see it in the waiter or waitress that they're becoming angry too. They come to your table, you can see the anger in the face, and you treat them nicely. What happens? They generally, what? Calm down a little bit. And they generally respond nicer, with gentleness. It happens all the time. It happens all the time around us. So mirror neurons are part of who we are. Rick Warren says this. He says, let me give you a little tip that will save you a lot of problems and a lot of heartache and a lot of conflict in your life. When other people raise their voices at you, you lower yours. I didn't understand this when I was a teacher, but I had a teacher actually share this with me right toward the end of my teaching time. So there's a simple trick that will save us an enormous amount of conflict. In your marriage, in your parenting, this is Rick Warren, in your friendships, and in your work, when other people raise their voice, you need to learn to automatically lower yours. That's called strength under control. What the teacher shared with me, she said, when the classroom is a little bit out of control and they're talking, they're not listening to you, she said, don't yell at them. She said, speak softer. She said, be patient, speak softer. And she said, the classroom will settle down on its own. Now, she advised not to do that all the time, but you need to establish things. But she said, use that technique. And I used that technique, and it worked. Okay? Didn't work 100% of the time, but it worked a lot of the time. Gentleness diffuses conflict. Strength under control means that somebody raises their emotions, you lower yours. You're not going to mimic them. You're not going to mock them. You're going to remain focused. Now, I'm preaching on this week. And of course, you know what happens when you preach on something, when you speak about something. God says, let's see how well you're putting this to practice. And God gave me opportunities to practice this week, and I failed sometimes. There's no doubt about it. But there was a few other times where there was conflict going on within our home. And instead of getting angry, instead of getting mad, maybe I may have looked angry on the outside, but I tried to tell myself, remain calm, under control, be gentle, and see if that helps. And when I practiced this, it helped. I need to be a lot better at it. God, I don't want more practice. I just want to be better at it. You can be better at it too. Gentleness diffuses conflict. And when you diffuse conflict, then other things will happen as well. Gentleness neutralizes critics. Okay? You've all had people, that criticize you for one thing or another. And when we're gentle, it will neutralize critics. Look at 1 Corinthians 4:13. It says, when we are slandered, we answer how? Kindly, or answer with gentleness. Okay? You don't have to retaliate. You don't have to try to tear them down because they said something bad about you. You don't have to prove you're right. Anything else, okay? You don't have to get even. You simply respond gently. And actually what happens is exactly what you want to do when you respond harshly. When you respond gently, it puts you into kind of a moral superiority to them. And it says, hey, you're attacking me, but look, I'm full of love, I'm full of compassion. Because I have Jesus in me, I'm able to respond to you gently. Paul says that we respond gently, even the evil things are said about us, even slanderous things are about it. Look at this. This is Titus chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, and it says this. It says, similarly, encourage young men to be self-controlled. Okay, he starts off in verse 6 that way. It says, some other good things here. It says, everything set example to them what is good. Your teaching should show integrity, seriousness, and look at this, verse 8, and soundness that cannot be condemned. Soundness of speech that cannot be condemned. And speech is not in there. Should be soundness of speech that can be condemned. Think about it. What's an attribute of soundness of speech? Controlled, logical, gentle. I think you can apply those words. Why? So that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. Okay? One of my commentaries says this. It says that when we talk about sound speech, it may refer to a healthy, persuasive, well thought out, attractively delivered presentation of the Christian gospel. Or it may be characterized as a speech, so the speech cannot be condemned. So Paul recognized that the medium plays an important part in the effectiveness of a speech, of the communicated message. So we take this and we look at it, and it is a little bit of a stretch, but it's the same thought and the same idea. Can people accuse you of anything? When you're gentle, when you approach things the right way, it'll silence them. They'll be quiet about it. Okay? Paul specifically talks about church leaders, and he talks about church leaders. It says this. It says, the Lord's servants must not quarrel. In other words, I shouldn't ever get in a fight with anybody. A verbal fight, a physical fight, anything else. Okay? Got some things to work on here. But it says, instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must what? Gently instruct. He must gently instruct. Okay? So, we don't retaliate. We don't get back. We gently instruct them. If you respond gently, it actually puts you in a superior area over them. Okay? Which leads us to this third thing. Gentleness is persuasive. If I have an opinion, and I have an opinion about something, and I want to share that opinion, and I share that opinion, and someone starts attacking me on my opinion, I automatically get defensive. I automatically say, I'm not going to listen to you at all. I'm going to think about how I'm going to fight against you. Okay? But if I have an opinion, and the first words out of somebody's mouth may be, well, I respect you for your opinion. They don't have to say that, but imply that. Or maybe they say, oh, I have a different idea on that, a different thought on that. In other words, if they're gentle in their response, guess what? I'm going to listen better. I'm going to actually consider what they have to say. And when we use gentleness in that way, when we use the strength and the control in that way, we will be more persuasive to people. They will listen to us more. They will consider what we have to say more. They'll think more about what we have to say as well. Okay? Let's look at the rest of that Timothy passage we just read. He says this, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of truth, we respond gently to them, to persuade them, especially for the gospel of Christ, to persuade them that God is love, that God does care, that God has compassion, that God knows what's going on in your life. We gently persuade them so they'll have repentance, so that they will come to their senses and they'll escape the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. And I think there's more to that than just salvation. I think it means that there are people out there that have formed opinions. And you've dealt with these people. If you've been in a church long enough, you know that there are Christians that have opinions 180 degrees different from yours, and both of you will claim we get our opinions from Scripture. That's okay. Gently talk to each other. Gently share with each other. And God will use that to persuade another person. I've told you this, I mentioned this a time before, when all this COVID stuff first happening, and my wife first said to me, you need to wear a mask everywhere. You know what my response was? I'm not going to wear a mask everywhere. Why do I need to wear a mask when I'm walking around outside? Why do I need to wear a mask here? Why do I need to wear a mask there? That was my response. And you know what? She didn't yell at me. She didn't, say this or that to me. She just started talking to me about it. And she reminded me of some things, some simple things that didn't have to do with us. But she said, one of the things that she said is she said, there are people, because we were actually talking about church service at that point. She said, there are people who will come to church that just aren't comfortable with other people not wearing masks, and if you wear a mask, it'll make them more comfort. That was a gentle response. That was a persuasive response. That got me thinking. Got me thinking so much that my view and my attitude toward masks has changed 180 degrees. So, think about how persuasive you could be if you're gentle. 1 Peter 3:15, and we're going to read this verse again later, says this, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that is in you. But do this with gentleness and respect. That means standing on the street corner, yelling at people, saying you're a sinner, you're going to go to hell, type of thing, doesn't work. That means getting in the face doesn't work. Have you ever noticed that the advertising has changed over time? And I still see some commercials on TV like this where, people get on TV and they start yelling, they start, shouting at you. But most of the time, commercials now, sometimes you don't even know what product they're advertising until the very end. They try to draw you in with this nice, lovely feeling type of thing, and then go buy this. Well, they're applying these principles because they know gentleness is persuasive. God's saying this, that a pathway to helping a person understand is simply gentleness. So gentleness is persuasive. Proverbs 25:15 says, through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. I like how the Message translation says this is patience or patient persistence pierces through indifference. Gentle speech breaks down rigid defenses. Gentle speech breaks down rigid defenses. Gentleness is persuasive. Gentleness will work. Proverbs 16:21. Pleasant words promote instruction. Okay, and then we're moving on to the fourth one. It will add, or gentleness is attractive. Okay? Gentleness is attractive. Look at Ruth, chapter 2, verse 13. Ruth is saying this to Boaz. And you guys know the story of Ruth and Boaz? Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law. Naomi lived in a foreign country. Her sons died. Naomi went back to Israel to live. Ruth went along with her, even though Naomi said she didn't have to. She went along with her. She got back to Israel. She took care of Naomi. They were poor. They had nothing. Ruth went out into the fields. It was a custom in that time that when you're harvesting your field, you didn't harvest everything. You left some of it behind so that those who were poor could come get food to feed themselves. So she went out into the field and she was harvesting. And Boaz actually saw her and just instructed people to make sure that she had plenty and to give her extra. Okay? And he did that because he had heard the story about how kind, how gentle Ruth was with Naomi. Now, the story goes forward. Ruth takes that stuff home. She tells Naomi the story. Naomi talks to her about everything else. Says, hey, Boaz is one of your kinsman redeemer. In other words, you have a chance to get another husband. Boaz could be one of those people, okay? Boaz is a kind, gentle man. So there was an attraction there. Boaz was attracted to Ruth because Ruth was kind and gentle with Naomi. Ruth was attracted to Boaz because Boaz was kind and gentle with them. So look what she says here. May I, Ruth, continue to find favor in your eyes, Boaz, my Lord. You have given me comfort and spoken kindly to your servant. The story ends, and you guys know this, that have read through the Bible. The story ends with eventually Ruth and Boaz fall in love and get married. Not eventually, pretty quickly, okay? 2 generations later, Ruth's grandson is David, the king of Israel. That's how attractive gentleness is. It can attract people to you. Some of you know I met Nancy I met Nancy actually before this. I first took notice of Nancy on a mission trip to India. You know what one of the first things I noticed about her was? There was a girl scared to death because she was sitting in a dental chair. She was scared to death of the dentist. And man, I could relate to that because I'm still scared of dentists. But she was scared, and Nancy didn't try to force her to sit there. She didn't, try to hold her down. She didn't do anything else. She picked her up in her arms and held her. She was gentle with her. She calmed her down. She reassured her. And I went, a good character trait. I like that. Gentleness is attractive. Okay? Look at this. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Now, this is directed more toward women, but it can be directed toward men as too. He says, beauty fades, outside appearance fades, but the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit remains forever. Wow, what a verse. Gentleness is something that will be always attractive. Then also, gentleness communicates love, okay? Since we're talking about Ruth and Boaz, we're talking about relationships. Husbands, love your wives and be gentle with them. I don't think I need to say much more about that. It communicates love, okay? I want to go on and just say this, that gentleness earns respect as well, okay? 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 7 says this, says, give them a favorable answer because they always be your loyal subjects. Now, what in the world is this talking about? This is talking about Rehoboam. Rehoboam was Solomon's son. Solomon had ruled for many years, okay? He had ruled for many years. He had died. He had passed away. Rehoboam became the next king. There was already some conflict in the kingdom. There were some things that people didn't like. Solomon was a wise king, but especially toward the end, he was kind of a little bit of a tyrant. He imposed some very hard things on people and some very difficult things on people. So Rehoboam became king. One of the first things he did as king was he asked the advisors. And these advisors were people that had been advising Solomon for a long period of time. And he asked the advisors what he should do, because the people had actually come to Rehoboam and said, Rehoboam, Solomon was a little bit too hard. If you ease up on us, if you're gentle with us, we will serve you forever. In other words, we'll work harder for you. We will do more for you. We'll follow you to anywhere you want to go. And so Rehoboam asked, he said, what should I do? And the king's advisors, the Solomon's advisors that he was asking at this point said, give them a favorable or a gentle answer, and they will always be your loyal subjects, just like the people claimed. But Rehoboam didn't do that, because Rehoboam went back to his friends. Okay, all these friends that actually one of the commentaries I read said probably his friends were in their early 20s. And some of us that are older remember how it was when that time we thought we had all the world's answers and everything else. So Rehoboam didn't like the old answer. He went to his young friends. What his young friends said? He says his young friends said, hey, if they're complaining, then you show them how tough you are. You don't be gentle with them. You demand more even than your father demanded. So that's what Rehoboam did. He demanded more. He wasn't gentle. He demanded more. And when he demanded more, he lost more than half the kingdom. Israel split into the northern kingdom and into Judah. Split in two different places. Another man, Jeroboam, came back. He became king of the northern kingdom. Gentleness will earn you respect. People respect you because of the gentleness in you. They'll see that in you. They'll want to follow you. If you're harsh, if you're taskmaster, they may obey, but they won't really follow. People will follow a gentle leader. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3 says this about Moses. Now the man Moses was very, very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. Think about that. Moses, very, very meek. Moses, who went up against Pharaoh. Moses, who led the people out of Israel. Moses, who confronted. Moses, who was a man who, in all honesty, had an anger problem. He was considered meek. Rick Warren says this, gentleness earns respect, and the more gentle you are, the more respected you're going to be as a leader. The greatest leader in the Bible was, of course, Moses. Moses liberated Israel for 400 years of slavery. He took on the most powerful man in the world at that time, Pharaoh, and said, let my people go. He had nothing but God on his side, and that was enough. He was fearless. He was unafraid to go and speak the truth in power. There are only two people in the Bible that are called gentle. Only two. Moses and Jesus. Neither one were weak. Jesus confronted when he needed to confront. Jesus even got angry when he needed to get angry. But he had anger under control. He walks into the temple one day. He walks into the temple, the outside courtyard area, and he sees people selling things there. And they were selling things to be used in the temple worship. Selling doves, selling lambs, selling other animals to be sacrificed. They were selling to help people worship. But Jesus knew what was really going on. They weren't there to help people worship. They were there to make a profit. They were gouging people. they were making a profit. It was not about worship. It was about filling my own pockets. And when Jesus saw that, when he saw that people were being taken advantage of, when he saw that what was going on was not right, he got angry. He turned over tables. He drove the merchants out. And then he said, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of robbers, den of thieves. What did the people respond? If you read that passage in Scripture, it says they were amazed. The word spread out about Jesus. This is the beginning of his last week. The word spread out. More people wanted to hear Jesus. More people wanted to see Jesus. More people were ready to follow Jesus at that point because of his response. Because he used strength under control. He was meek. He was gentle. Moses had an anger management problem. Think about the stories of Moses. You know, first of all, he grew up in Pharaoh's household, even though he was an Israelite. Okay, he was a Jewish man. He grew up in Pharaoh's household. When in his early adulthood, he was out. He was watching the Israelite people, the slaves. He saw a Egyptian mistreating one of them, and in his anger, he kills the Egyptian. That means he had to flee Egypt. He fled Egypt. He left. Okay? There's other stories about him and things he did. You know, he killed the Egyptian. When he finally came back and led the people out of Egypt, and he'd gone up to the mountain Sinai, and he got in the original 10 Commandments and got in and etched them in stone, and he brought them down. When he brought them back to the camp, he saw that the people had forgotten God and were worshiping an idol, and he threw the stones and broke them in his anger. Then he had to go redo those anger. There was another time where he's leading the people, and people were crying out, wanting water, and said, "Oh, we're going to die, we're going to die. It'd be better we'd be back in Egypt." And he got so mad at them for not trusting God and not keeping their focus on God that God had told him to say, actually speak to this rock and water will come out of it. But Moses was so angry, he took a staff and he hit it. He didn't do what God asked him to do, but water still flowed. But in his anger, he did those things, and his anger cost him. Cost him every time, cost him different things. The last time when he struck the rock, it cost him not to be able to enter into the promised land with the rest of the people. But here's the point. Even though he had an anger management problem, he was still considered meek. God doesn't look at you and expect you to be perfect. Only Jesus is perfect. Because of what Christ did for us, of his shedding his blood on the cross for us, God does see us as being perfect. But Jesus says, you want to inherit the earth? You want to lead people? You want to have? Then use gentleness. Be meek. When you're meek, when you're gentle, you have strength under control, even when you're angry, you will still remain controlled. Gentleness is also witnessed to unbelievers. Look at Titus chapter 3. And you can read verses 1 through actually about 5, but I just put 2 words out of verse 1, a couple in verse 2 here. Remind them. He says, remind them of other things. And then get to verse 2. Remind them to speak evil of who? No one. Christian, non-Christian, blue party, green party, purple party, yellow party, red party, whatever. Okay? If you come from the U.S., Democrats, Republicans, I forgot whatever parties they are, Tea Party, whatever, okay? And it doesn't matter where their politics are, it doesn't matter where they come from, it doesn't matter their social class, it doesn't matter anything. Speak evil of no one. Avoid quarreling. Be gentle. Show perfect courtesy to all people. 1 Peter 3:15 says this, and we read this before, but I want to remind you again. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks for the reason of hope that is you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And we're going to go back to this, and I just want to say this. Gentleness is a witness to unbelievers. And I've shared this story with you before, but one summer I spent a summer doing youth camps, and we were at actually a big conference center. We were there all summer long. 10 weeks, 700 kids every week, 700 students. There was a team of 20 of us. Was on that team. We usually finished our days about 10:30 at night. We started at about 7:30 in the morning. We finished, like I said, 10:30 at night. There was a group of us, usually 4 or 5 of us, sometimes as many as 10 of us on the staff would hop in cars and drive about 5 minutes away to a fast food joint. It was the closest place around, and it was the only place open still at 10:30 at night. It was called Hardee's. If you live on the West Coast, I think you know it as Carl's Jr., but it was called Hardee's. Okay, we gone there. We went there at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, because sometimes we were so busy we didn't have time to stop to eat meals. Maybe lunchtime was not a big deal, but sometimes supper time we didn't. And so we'd run there and get food. And we made from the very beginning. It was just kind of understanding between everybody who was there that no matter what, we would show a lot of courtesy to the people there at the restaurant. And we did. We showed a lot of courtesy. We were gentle. We were respectful of them, everything else. Sometimes we go in and it would be 10:30 and they weren't supposed to close till 11, but they hadn't had anybody there for 30 minutes or an hour, so they would kind of be shutting things down and they wouldn't have what we wanted. It was okay. Well, what else you got? Okay. By the end of the summer, that kind of worked to our advantage. There was times that we went in and they would say, hey, we got a lot of this left. We're just going to give it to you. Okay, you want this? Okay, great. But there was one time also toward the end of summer that this is what happened. A youth group came in. One of the youth groups that was there at our camps, one of the groups of teenagers. There was 3 van loads of them, so probably, I don't know, remember I didn't count them, but 30, 40 people, maybe 45 people, okay? Youth and adults. They had gotten there before we did, which they shouldn't have been because they were supposed to be doing their own group time with their churches. But they were there. We got there. They were already there. We walked into the restaurant. There were French fries, food all over the place, on the floors, everywhere else, trash everywhere. The place was a mess. There was Coke, sodas spilled all over the place. People were, there was some of the adults were at the counter actually arguing with the staff there. And then they all left. And we'd only been there about 5 or 10 minutes. But when they left gospel tracts right in the middle of the mess on the tables. About 4 or 5 of them. And it was almost like all of us knew, all the people on the team I was on kind of felt the same thing at the same time, because we all, without saying anything, went and grabbed the gospel tracts and stuffed them in our pockets really quick. Because we knew how they treated that staff would not be a witness to those unbelievers. We knew part of that staff was unbelievers because we had been working with them. Not working with them, but we had built a relationship with them over the course of 10 weeks. At this point, it was almost toward the end, maybe 8 weeks, 7 weeks. But we had built a relationship with them. Enough that there was kindness going back and forth, that we knew their names, because people work hourly shifts, they work the same shifts usually. We knew those people. They knew who we are. They knew what we represented. And we didn't want that witness to be harmed, to hurt. How do you treat people? If you go to a restaurant, well, you can't go to a restaurant right now. If you call and make a to-go order, and your to-go order's wrong, how do you respond? Are you gentle? See, gentleness is not only about sharing the gospel. Gentleness is how we interact with people. Do we show them respect? Do we show them gentleness? Because if we don't do that, they won't be open to hear the gospel. So use gentleness and respect. Gentleness makes us Christ-like, and this is the last thing I'm going to share with you on these things. Galatians chapter 5, and the fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against these things there is no such law. The more you become like Christ, the more you should see these things in your life. The more gentle you should be. The more love, peace, patience, kindness, those things. And so when you practice gentleness, it will help you become more like Christ. And I said practice. I want to give you 3 things. 3 things to practice this week. Because as I mentioned to you, just like I was preparing for this sermon, God gave me an opportunity to practice the things in this sermon. And I know that God's going to give me many more opportunities in this, especially in this next few days, because this is what I've preached. But practice these things. 3 things. First, practice. Be understanding, not demanding with those who serve you this week. Okay? Maybe you're making a phone call and talking to someone on the phone. Be patient. Be gentle. Be understanding. Not saying roll over and play dead. You can be firm, but be gentleness in how you're firm. If somebody else is serving you in some way, talk to them. I worked in a restaurant for a long time. Well, not for a long time, for a couple years when I was in university as well. And one of the things I learned about working in a restaurant was this. The customers who were gentle with us, who were respectful with us, those customers got better service. They did. No doubt about it. Okay? When you're having a bad day and things are going on and you have somebody that just complains more and more, it just puts you in a worse mood. But if you have a bad day and stuff are going on, you have a customer that comes in and they're concerned for you, they show gentleness, they show respect, it can change your day just like that into something positive. So be understanding. Try to understand where they're coming from. Try to understand that maybe they don't know. Maybe they can't answer your question. Don't assume the worst, but assume the best in people. Be understanding, not demanding of those who serve you. Here's the second thing. When someone disagrees with you, okay, don't be like a cat that's in danger. Don't let the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Don't bristle up. Don't get ready for the fight. But take a deep breath. Be gentle. Listen to what they have to say. Okay? Think about what they have to say. You don't have to give in. Stand your ground. I've had conversations with people, I've had friendships with people in my life, that some of them were not believers. Some of them were believers but had completely opposite ideas on some things that I had. But you know what? I could still have a good friendship with them because when I'm gentle with them, it's okay for them to disagree. I don't have to give in to what they say. They don't have to give in to what I say. But we listen to each other, we respect each other, and we help each other. Third thing is, when you're disappointed, be gentle, not judgmental. Okay? And I don't know really how to say this other than this. It's people are going to disappoint us. Things are going to disappoint us. So next time when someone disappointed you, instead of saying, "Why did you do?" Take a deep breath and think about how can you respond gently. And then share with them. Talk to them. Be gentle in your response. Help them to understand why that was not a good thing. Help them to understand with gentleness and respect why you were disappointed. Try to understand their side of it. Try to understand who they are. We do these things and we will show gentleness in our lives. Again, 1 Peter 3:4 says, beauty should be of your inner self, an unfading beauty that of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. See, God says, you want to inherit the earth. Literally mean you want to be ruler, you want to be over all. Then here's the trick. Be gentle. Be meek. You do that, people will honor you. I will honor you. And good things will happen in your life. Let's go to God in prayer.